What would a Conservative government do if they were elected to power? Well, that was the question put to Canadians by the research firm Abacus Data. And to discuss the findings, we're now joined by the chair and the CEO of Abacus, David Coletto. David, good to see you again.
Great to see you, Michael.
Listen, obviously the Conservatives don't have a campaign platform right now, so really no specifics. But I guess this is based on what Canadians have heard from Mr. Poilievre and therefore formed an opinion. Talk to us about your polling and what Canadians believe that the Conservative leader would do if he actually were elected Prime Minister.
Yeah, and really the objective here is to understand what their perception is, right? What would a government do? You're right. No real policy has been put out there, but there is, some pretty clear signals from people on what they think a Poilievre-led government would do. For example, a lot of people, more people think that that government would eliminate the national carbon tax, would defund the English language CBC, and almost half of those that have an opinion think that the Conservatives would make it harder for women to get an abortion, and about the same number think it would eliminate the national childcare program that was established by the Liberals. So those are the four in which a sizable number of people have some sense or believe that the Conservatives would do that. Whether they will or not is not what's important here. It's what the public thinks they're going to do, and that I think signals one, how effective they've been at communicating their opposition to the carbon tax, which is not new. Previous Conservative parties and leaders have run on that, and it's made a lot of focus on its promise to defund the CBC. But beyond that, you start to see where perceptions are on childcare and abortion, which is a real sticky issue for Conservatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And add to that, and again, based on your research, you've identified, or at least Canadians who took part in the survey, they identified to you their priorities, which they don't necessarily believe that the Conservatives will do anything about.
Correct. And the big ones are housing affordability. Almost every Canadian thinks the government, a future Conservative government, should focus on that. Taking climate change seriously, and balancing the federal budget in 4 years, plus, cut my taxes. So on the first two, those are two that the Conservatives, I think, have talked a lot about. For example, housing. You've got Mr. Poilievre out there talking quite often about how difficult it is for people to buy a home these days. Not enough, I think people think the Conservatives are going to do anything about that, but there's an opportunity there for them. Issue like climate change, on the other hand, that's a real, I think, liability for the Conservatives, because even a sizable portion of those that are going to vote Conservative want the Conservatives to take that issue seriously, but not many think that it actually will. So that's an issue. Interestingly, when we look at the issue of abortion, for example, I mentioned earlier that almost half of those that have an opinion think the Conservatives are going to make it harder for a woman to have an abortion in Canada, but only 1 in 4 Canadians want that to happen. So there's another issue where the perception of what the Conservative government would do is vastly different than what people want it to do.
Okay, so let's pick up on that point then, because here you have Mr. Poilievre, who really just took over the Conservative Party about 8 months ago. Given that this is the perception that Canadians have of him right now, after seeing him on the job, on the Hill, giving his speeches, giving his news conferences, has this been a missed opportunity for Pierre Poilievre to essentially grow the party base?
Well, I think to some extent. I mean, the first thing to keep in mind is not everybody is paying a lot of attention to what Mr. Poilievre is even saying. The numbers who definitely believe that the government, a Conservative government, would, for example, get rid of the carbon tax isn't that high, given how often they talk about it. So the first thing is to give them a little credit that not everybody is fully digesting everything that Mr. Poilievre is saying. But on the other hand, I do think there are clear signals in this data about where the opportunities are. Issues like housing, which they focused on, issues around taxes, which they focused on, are obvious strengths for the party. But where it gets into trouble, where there's more division, are issues like the CBC, climate change, and social issues or moral issues like abortion. So I think that to answer your question, I really think that I don't think they've done everything they've needed perhaps to do to build that tent, but what they've certainly done is motivated that Conservative base, and I think that's been job one for Mr. Poilievre, is to keep that Conservative family together, because there are risks with Mr. Bernier and the People's Party, And even this week, we've heard of perhaps a new centrist Conservative Party coming into the mix. So he's trying to keep that Conservative family together.
Yeah, so keeping them together, but there is still, as you allude to, an opportunity here to grow the base if he focuses on the issues that identified by Canadians as being priorities for them.
Absolutely, right. And those priorities remain the cost of living and housing, healthcare, and taxes, which is part of the cost of living agenda. So, I'm always advising anyone who wants to connect with people in any audience is know what they care about, know what they want you to talk about, and that's a clear signal. So there's opportunities here for the Conservatives to continue to differentiate themselves from the Liberals, but also to speak to the issues that most Canadians remain worried about today, and that's really what this survey highlights.
David Coletto, appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
My pleasure, Michael. Take care.